the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 20, the 2023 African Cup. This episode is looking at the players of Ghana. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin and this is a continuation of Series 20 on the 2023 African Cup played in January 2024. We've done a full and short version on the groups and teams for the African Cup, and now we're looking at the players of each team, this episode covering Ghana's players. So we're doing this mediacast in two parts. Part one here is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. And part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad selected. We think that'll be in early January. At that time, we'll go back over the list we compiled today and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover a couple of other things that I'll talk about at the end of the media cast here. Yeah, we did do a media cast on the players of Ghana going into the 2021 African Cup. That took place in January 2022, but even more recently, another one going into the World Cup in December of 2023. So we've left links in the show notes for those. Both of those provide biographies on the candidates in quite a bit more detail than we'll go into here. And since a lot of that is still relevant, we've actually decided to not commit ourselves to full player media casts every 2 years for the African region. So we're going to be treating this one as more of an update. In those series, we were able to show who made it and who didn't make it to the final squad. But really, we could only go as far as predicting who the starters were going to be. But here, we'll begin the list we compiled. We'll begin with the list we compiled for the World Cup, and we'll review not only who made the squad in both tournaments, but we'll update by saying who the starters turned out to be. Then we're going to turn our attention to 2023 here, and update the players based on their participation over the past 2 years. So we'll emerge then with a list of new players and their likelihood of making it to the squad for this 2023 African Cup. We're going to put a few players in the spotlight. These will be players who were not covered in the media casts for the previous cups and who have a good chance of starting. So any main player that we don't put in the spotlight here were covered in the media cast in the previous cups, the 2022 World Cup, the most recent there. And that'll be most of the players actually. And the information in those media casts is not too outdated. So again, we refer you to the link in the show notes as kind of an accessory to this one. For fun, we are going to finish with our early predictions of the starters, and we'll also let you know what to expect in part two of the media cast. So before we begin, we'll just talk a little bit about what we're doing in general. So we have made a separate video on YouTube about what we'll be covering over the next 9 months. So YouTube watchers can see that link right here on the screen, and it can also be found in the show notes for both watchers and listeners. In short, we have completed our series on the groups, teams, and players, or at least part one of the players, for the 2023 Asian Cup. And now we are focused on the 2023 African Cup. Again, both of these taking place in January 2024. So we've done long or full and short versions for the teams of the African Cup, and now you see we're doing the part one of the players series. So Furthermore, we've also started coverage on the qualifying for the 2026 World Cup, and that will be what our attention will turn to after these tournaments. Okay, well, let's begin then. So we begin by looking back to the list that we created for the 2022 World Cup there. And at that time, we had outgoing manager Milovan Rajevac and incoming manager Otto Addo. And let's look at the story of what happened there. So Rajevac had been the manager since 2021, but in January 2022, they performed miserably in the African Cup there, and he was fired after that dismal performance. So Otto Addo was brought in, but just as a caretaker manager from May 2022 through to the World Cup. But he did say he would leave immediately after the tournament, and was good for his word there. He did. So the new manager, Chris Hughton, was brought in in February 2023. You'll see if you're watching the YouTube version that Chris Hughton's name is in grey. That means he hasn't been through a tournament. Meanwhile, Otto Addo, his name is in black, so that means he has been through a tournament. So let me tell you a little bit about Chris Hughton. Then he has been manager of Ghana since the Ghana's national team since 2023. Prior to that, he was with clubs in England, mostly the second division clubs there: Nottingham Forest, Brighton, Norwich, and Birmingham. But he was also manager of Newcastle for a short time. And that is the manager going into this tournament. So we are going to get rid of the highlights here. And we will highlight what we think for 2023. So we'll use green to say we think he is definitely going to be there. In other words, we don't think that they're going to get rid of Chris Hughton before the tournament. You never know, but that's how we're seeing it. Okay, let's move on to goalkeepers. And we'll begin with the selection in 2023, or the list we made in 2023. So we had as a definite candidate Lawrence Atizigi, and as a likely candidate a Jojo Wallacott. We also had possible candidates Richard Ofori and Abdul Nuruddin. And we also, for most of these categories, have some players at the possible or unlikely level, or players who seem to be off the squad. But we're not going to put them on the list here unless they have been active in the past 2 years. So actually we had 4 goalkeepers who seemed to be off the squad, and none of them kind of came back into the fray. Furthermore, we had predicted Lawrence Atizigi and Jojo Wallacott. We weren't sure which was going to be a starter, but we knew it would be one of the two. As it turned out, Atizigi was selected, as was Wallacott. Richard Ofori was not selected, and that was due to a knee injury. In fact, he was kind of expected to vie for the starting role, but injured out, or sort of ruled out due to a knee injury. He had also been injured for the African Cup at the beginning of 2022 there, so a bit unfortunate for Richard Ofori. And that opened the door for Abdul Nuruddin, who was also selected, probably the third string keeper. You see we have their names in blue if you're looking at the YouTube version of this, and that means we weren't sure which of the two was going to start, Atizigi or Wallacott, but we thought it would be one of those two. Okay, let's look back at the history a little bit. So actually it was Wallacott in the African Cup at the beginning of 2022, and he was expected to be in the World Cup, the starter in the World Cup also, but his broken finger shortly before the tournament ruled him out. So Atizigi started in the World Cup there. And okay, we're going to erase the highlights here and kind of reorganize these players as to what has happened since, or yes, what's happened since. So Atizigi kind of continued on in the starting role, and he is still considered a definite candidate for us here. Wallacott, however, has moved down to just the possible level, so he never really got his starting position back. In fact, he was kind of overtaken by Richard Ofori, who we now have at the likely level. And Nuruddin remains at the possible level. And that's really all the candidates we have. We won't mention the ones who are kind of below this level. So it'll be 3 of these. So once again, Lawrence Atizigi at the definite, Richard Ofori likely, and Wallacott and Nuruddin possible candidates. In terms of who we think is going to be the starter, as I said, Atizigi continued on as the starting keeper after the World Cup. However, for the last 2 matches in November there, it was Richard Ofori who got the start. That's why we think he's a bit more likely even than Wallacott. So it's hard to say given the recent changes. And again, Wallacott was supposed to be the starting keeper, so we think his claim is almost as good as the other 2. So we're not going to predict here who the starter will be, because we think it could be any one of those 3. Okay, let's move on to defenders, central defenders, and we will start with the list that we created for the World Cup there. We had Daniel Amartey as a definite candidate, and Alexander Djiku as a likely candidate, and we had Jonathan Mensah. We had 4 possible candidates: Jonathan Mensah, Aladou Seydou, Joseph Aidoo, and Abdul Momin. And we're going to put one name that we thought was seemingly off the squad, and that is Nicholas Opoku, because he does kind of feature in the narrative here. Sorry, I am just fixing the graphics because I put everyone in the wrong spot. Okay, we're good. We're also going to add a new candidate to this list. Mohamed Saladou kind of showed up at the end there in just before the World Cup, so he gets added to the list. Those who were selected in 2022 were Daniel Amartey, so our definite candidate did make it. Alexander Djiku was selected for the Cup. And as we saw, Mohamed Saladou came into the Cup also. Joseph Aidoo was also selected, one of our possible candidates, as a bench player. So we actually had Daniel Amartey as the starter, and we thought maybe it'll be Alexander Djiku, but we didn't predict Mohamed Salisu coming in, who did actually gain the starting position. Eventually, it was actually Amartey and Djiku who were the starting pair in the African Cup, and for the World Cup, Salisu replaced Djiku in the starting position. Okay, let's clear out those numbers or those highlights from 2022 and see what has happened since. So Daniel Amartey has moved down from a definite candidate now to a likely candidate. He, as we said, was a starter in the Cup, but he's been struggling a bit with injuries over the last while, and has been just involved in just one of the 6 games. So if he's fit, we think he would be a strong candidate, but that injury concern makes us unsure about him. We put him at the likely level to kind of balance it out. Alexander Djiku has moved down to the possible level, but he also is an injury concern. He was out with a fracture for the November game, so we'll have to wait till part 2 to kind of update that. Going to our possible candidates, Jonathan Mensah was not selected and did not return for the national team. Let me see when he last played for them. That was in June of 2022. So he was called up after the African Cup, but before the World Cup had been off the squad. Jonathan Mensah. Aladou Seydou, we now have as a likely candidate, so he has kind of moved up the ranks a little bit there. Joseph Aidoo, also a likely candidate. However, he also is an injury concern. And that looks like it might last into the Cup because it's a Achilles tendon surgery that he went in for. I think that was in October, and he was out for the last 3 games. So Joseph Aidoo, again, likely if he's fit. And Nicholas Opoku, who seemed to be off the squad there, also moves up to a likely candidate position. Meanwhile, Alexander Jiku moves moves down to a possible. We did that one already. And Abdul Momin has not reappeared, so he disappears from our list. So quite a few candidates to deal with here. And let's see what has happened over the past 2 years. So Jiku did return and play some games there. And he yes, because he had been replaced by Salisu. Salisu has not played since the World Cup, so he was kind of brought in for it and selected for the squad. And then I'm not sure what happened, but he is no longer being selected. So World Cup 2022, the last time he appeared. So we're actually going to remove him from the list here. Opoku and Adams did see some action and actually came in for the last 2 games. So it's very confusing. I'll just review the list here, but we actually can't predict a starter here. We have Daniel Amartey, Aladou Seydou, Joseph Aidoo, and Nicholas Opoku, all as likely candidates. And among those, Amartey and Aidoo are injury concerns. And we also have Alexander Jiku as a possible candidate, but he also is an injury concern. So that's probably why Opoku and Seydou were used in the last 2 games there. So really, we need to see how these injuries resolve themselves to get a clearer idea. But as with goalkeepers, we can't really predict any starters here. We are going to firstly change Aladou Seydou's name to Black Tex because now he's been through a World Cup, so has a tournament experience. But we're also going to move him from this position, central defender, down to a right defender and talk about him there, because in the World Cup and since, he's been playing more as a right defender than as a central defender. So we're going to move him from the list. So let's review the list. We have no definite candidates. We have Daniel Amartey, Joseph Aidoo, and Nicholas Opoku as likely candidates. And we have Alexander Jiku as a possible candidate. But 3 of them are kind of injury doubts. Which is probably why Opoku and Aladou Seydou played in the last couple of games there. And so we'll just have to wait and see. For that reason, we're not going to predict a starter or starters for this position because we're really not sure. The last order of business here is we're going to put Nicholas Opoku in the spotlight because he may be a starter. And we didn't cover him in previous podcasts. So Nicholas Opoku has been with Ghana since 2017 with 18 caps and 1 goal. He's 26 years old. and he plays for Amiens in France since 2021, and was with Udinese in Italy prior to that. Despite being on the squad since 2017, he's never been selected for a tournament, and in fact, not even selected for preliminary squads for the 3 tournaments since his first cap. But he did return after an almost 2-year absence in March 2023 and started the last 5 of their remaining 8 games and was on the bench for 3 others. Now, that may mean that he got some of his starts because he was covering injuries, and if those players return, he won't get as many starts. But he is kind of in the mix there as one of our likely candidates. So Nicholas Opoku, not new to the squad, but probably a better chance of reaching the cup this time than he has in previous cups. All right, let's move on to left backs, and we will start with the list we compiled in 2022. So at that time, we had Baba Rahman as a definite candidate. We thought he was going to be the starter too. And we had Gideon Mensah as a likely candidate. We thought he might be the starter. We also had a possible candidate in Dennis Nkrumah Corsa, and a couple of other candidates below that who we won't mention. So in terms of who made the squad, Baba Rahman did make the squad, and so did Gideon Mensah. But our possible candidate, Nkrumah Corsa, did not make the squad and last appeared in June 2022. So we might as well remove him right now. In terms of who the starter was, it was Baba Rahman started and finished games 1 and 3, and Gideon Mensah started game 2. So they kind of shared the position there. And now let's clear out those highlights from the previous tournament and take a look at what happened recently. So we have seen the two sharing the position, but over the past while, Mensah has taken over, basically. So we still have Gideon Mensah as a likely candidate. He started 6 of the 12 games over the past 2 years, but he did start the last 4, which makes him a bit more likely than Baba Rahman, whose situation is a bit complex. So we have him as a kind of unlikely candidate at this point. Basically, he has appeared in 1 of the 9 matches, 1 of the last 9 matches, and was furthermore injured for the last 2. So we kind of think he's almost off the team now, but he's such a veteran that we wouldn't be surprised to see him come back if he's fit. We did see that Nkrumah Corsa has not been called up. He hasn't been called up since June 2022, but we do have a new candidate at the portable level here, and that is Hamidou Abdul Fatawu. Actually, there's a little uncertainty about his name because some sources have Hamidou as his last name and most sources have Fatawu. So I'll just call him Fatawu here, but that may be incorrect. Anyway, he is at a possible candidate. At a possible level. So the list then, as it currently stands, is Gideon Mensah as a likely candidate, Fatawu as a possible candidate, and Baba Rahman seemingly or possible but unlikely. And again, we're not really confident in predicting a starter there, but I guess Gideon Mensah has a pretty strong edge. And we'll have to see though if Baba Rahman can come back into contention after he recovers from his injury. Okay, let's move on to the right back position and again begin with what we had in 2022. So we had a likely candidate in Andy Yiadom, and we had a possible candidate in Dennis Odoi. And then once the new squad came out, we actually had someone added to the squad. That was Tariq Lamptey. And we have also moved Aladou Seydou from his designation as a central defender. But we're going to talk about him here as a right defender, a right back, because that's where he has played. So we'll almost kind of treat him like a new candidate here. We did have 3 players who seem to be off the squad, and none of those have come back into the picture since, so we won't complicate things by reintroducing them. But let's see who started here or who was selected. Actually, all 3 of these players were selected, so Tariq Lamptey, Aladou Seydou, and Dennis Odoi. And it was actually Aladou Seydou, so that took us by surprise because he was coded as a central defender. Aladou Seydou starting games 1 and 3, and Tariq Lamptey starting game 2 there, as well as subbing into game 1. And that is the situation. And I'll just go back to the 2021 African Cup. So it was actually Andy Yiadom, who surprisingly was not selected for this cup, even though we had him as a likely candidate. Andy Yiadom had been the starter in the 2021 African Cup. That was in January 2022, but in March 2022, for their 2 World Cup qualifying playoff games, it was Dennis Odoi who was selected. So perhaps Yiadom was on his way out there. Neither of those 2 players, Yiadom or Odoi, were brought to the World Cup. What am I talking about? Odoi was brought to the World Cup. Yiadom wasn't brought to the World Cup, and we're actually going to remove him from the list here because he last played in June 2022. So Yiadom no longer part of the consideration. And we're also going to remove Lamptey from the list because even though he made the squad and started game 2, he, like the central defender we just saw, only appeared for the cup and has not appeared since then. So we can. I mean, it is possible that these players will once again pop up, just be called into the tournament. You can't help but think that the players who get them there and play all the qualifying games must be resentful that these players are just brought in. The central defender is Mohamed Salisu, so they may be brought back for the cup, but we're going to assume that they're kind of off the team because they haven't been called up since. Okay, so basically Lamptey took Yiadom's spot there that he probably would have gotten if Lamptey hadn't come around, and we saw that it's actually the central defender Aladou Seydou that seemed most clear cut in the position. Anyway, we're going to remove the highlights and see what happened over the next or over the last year. And basically, as we said, Lamptey has disappeared. Odoi has come back into the position, and so he is actually, no, he is still at the possible level. And then we move Aladou Seydou up from a kind of being new to the position to being a likely candidate, the likely candidate for the position. Seydou has started 5 of their 12 games over the last since the 2022 World Cup, whereas Odoi has started 3 of the games, so kind of sharing the position, and that is what we're going to predict going forward. There are no other candidates to talk about here, just these 2, and we predict that it is going to be a sharing of the position. And actually, Dennis Odoi's name should be in black now because he has been through a tournament. Okay, that is right backs, and that is the defense. And we move on to the midfield, beginning with defensive midfielders. So back in 2022, we look at the list, we had Elisha Owusu as a possible candidate. We didn't think he'd be a starter. That's why he's highlighted in yellow, kind of a supporting candidate. And that's the only name we had in the top three tiers of the defensive midfielders. We did have one who seemed to be off the squad, and we're not going to put him on the list because he hasn't come back into the picture. So we'll just leave it at that for now, because we're going to combine defensive midfielders with central midfielders right away here. So let's look at the central midfielders back in 2022. And we had a definite candidate in Thomas Partey and Mohamed Kudus. A bit confusing. He's coded as a central midfielder. He's more and more becoming an attacker, actually, and sometimes does play as an attacking midfielder for Ghana, but also plays as a central midfielder too. We had a likely candidate in Idrisu Baba in the central midfield, and also Edmund Addo, likely candidate. And then we had a possible candidate in Mubarak Wakaso there, and we won't go into the players who are below that. But we did get, no, we didn't get a new player when the final roster was published, but we're going to add a new player here, and that is attacking midfielder Daniel Kofi Kiera. And that is because even though he's coded as an attacking midfielder, he ended up playing as a central midfielder. So we'll kind of treat him as if he was a new character or a new candidate here. So those are the candidates, and let's see what happens. So we did have Thomas Partey, who was selected. Actually, I'll go back to the defensive midfield too. Elisha Owusu was selected, and as we predicted, he was a supporting character. He was on the squad but didn't see any action in the cup. We thought Thomas Partey would be a starter as well as a definite candidate, and we thought the same of Mohamed Kudus. And Thomas Partey did start all 3 games, and so did Mohamed Kudus. So we were good in our predictions there. However, Idrisu Baba was not selected for the cup. We're going to keep him on the list here, though, because he has featured, or he has featured since. The same is true of Edmund Addo, not selected for the cup, but he has featured since. Mubarak Wakaso, however, was not selected or last appeared for the squad in June 2022. So we're going to remove him from the list here. Okay, let's look back and see how things have gone. So in the African Cup, it was actually Thomas Partey and the attacking midfielder we mentioned, Daniel Kofi Kiera, with Idrisu Baba joining them in one of the games that where they put out a 3-man midfield. In the other 2, it was just a 2-man midfield. In those World Cup qualifying games, Baba Ramyan seemed to overtake Kiera there, so it was Thomas Partey and, sorry, not Baba Rahman, but Idrisu Baba. So Partey and Baba in those 2 World Cup qualifying games. And then Partey and newcomer Abdul Samed, who's a defensive midfielder that we'll see soon, joined them, in the World Cup, and Kudus joined Partey and Abdul Samed. So Partey, Abdul Samed, and Kudus in a 3-man midfield in the Cup. Okay, let's get rid of the highlights for now, and we'll start moving players around according to their recent participation. And I will say, actually, recently, over the past 2 years, it's been a real mix of Partey. Adu has returned, Edmund Adu, and we saw that defensive midfielder Abdul Samed has come in, and also Idrisu Baba So we're not really sure here too what is going on in terms of the starters, and we're not going to make a prediction. Maybe I will predict Thomas Partey, but anyway, let's go back to the defensive midfield and reorganize the spots. So we had Elisha Owusu as a possible candidate. We saw that he was selected, but he remains as a possible candidate. Meanwhile, we have Salis Abdul Samed coming into the picture, and I think we got to put the spotlight on him. I wonder where we had him for the 2022 World Cup, because he was involved prior to that. Anyway, Salis Abdul Samed we now have as a definite candidate. He was new in the 2022 World Cup, but since he was selected there, he's not new to us anymore. And among the central midfielders, Thomas Partey remains as a definite candidate. However, Thomas Partey is another injury concern here. Two separate injuries over the past year, and was out for 4 of the matches, including the last 2 matches. So I have to keep an eye on Thomas Partey. Maybe that's why I didn't think of him as a starter here. Edmund Addo was at the likely level and remains there. He has returned after a 9-month absence, missed 9 games there, but started 4 of the remaining 9 games. So Edmund Addo, a likely candidate. Mohamed Kudus, we'll continue to treat him as a central midfielder, but we are going to move him down from possible to likely. He started 10 of the games and was subbed in for 2 over the past little while. No, that looks like a definite candidate for me, and that's my thinking too, that he's a definite candidate. I'm not sure why we said likely. And Baba, Idrisu Baba moves down from a likely candidate to a possible candidate. And we have a player to add at the possible level too. That is Majid Ashimiru. And he just came into the team in March 2023, actually returned from an absence in March 2023, but is at the possible level here. And that is it. Daniel Kofi Kiera is off the squad. He didn't appear since the 2002 World Cup, and I think we already said that Mubarak Wakasu last appeared in June 2022. So this is our new list. It's Thomas Partey as a definite candidate, and Mohamed Kudus as a definite candidate too, though more, I think of him more as an attacking midfielder than a central midfielder. We have a likely candidate in Edmund Addo, and possible candidates in Idrisu Baba and Majid Ashimuru. In terms of starters, well, I'm going to say Thomas Partey will be a definite starter if he's fit, but there is that kind of caveat on him. And I'm still trying to figure out why I had Mohamed Kudus as a likely candidate. But I am going to say not only a definite candidate, but a starter as well. So Mohamed Kudus. Okay, that is the central defense. Now we move over to look at left and right midfielders. Well, we're just kind of making a note on the position here. We did have, in 2022, we had a possible candidate in Christopher Antwi Adjei. And that was all we had there for left midfielders, and I might as well deal with the right midfield at the same time. We had 3 candidates, but they were all seemingly off the squad, so very small chance of making it, and none of them did. So now we have no players coded for this position because Christopher Antwi Adjei was not selected and has not been called up since. So really we have no candidates left in this position. However, we do see that Ghana sometimes uses a 4-3-3 permission. Sorry, 4-3-3 formation. So they sometimes have a three-man midfield. But we have seen that it's the central or defensive midfielders who play the role, or an attacking midfielder coming back to play the role. So that is what leads to a bit of confusion with Mohamed Kudus. Perhaps he is playing a bit more of an attacking role, but is looking like a left midfielder in that 4-3-3 formation. The same as on the right side, we see mostly defensive and central midfielders covering when they do have the right midfield position. Okay, we're going to move on now to upfield. So we're talking about left wingers, but what we're really talking about is the upper left quadrant of the field. So left wingers, left attacking midfielders, perhaps even left forwards sometimes. Okay, so we had in 2022 a likely candidate in Kamaldeen Sulemana, and we had a possible candidate in Joseph Paintzel. We had a couple of other possible candidates in Yoya Boa and Daniel Afri there. And we also had a couple of players who seem to be off the squad. We're not going to mention those, but we will add, as if he was a newly added player, we're going to deal with Jordan Ayew here. He's actually all over the place in the front, sometimes on the left wing, sometimes on the right wing, a couple of times even as centre forward. So we'll be seeing his name pop up all over the place. But we're going to do him here because he has been on the left in this position as a left attacking midfielder mostly. Okay, let us go back and see what happened in the cup. No, I should do who was selected first. So no surprise that Jordan Ayew was selected. We did have him pegged as a starter, and he wasn't actually. He subbed into game one, 77 minutes in, and then for games 2 and 3, he was a starter. So we're kind of right there with Jordan Ayew. Daniel Paintzel did not make the squad. I should have said first, though, that Kamaldeen Sulemana did make the squad, but he wasn't a starter. He was just a substitute in 2 of the games there. As I said, Joseph Paintzel not selected for the squad. And surprisingly, Daniel Afri was as well, although he was a bench player. He didn't see any action in the cup there. Okay, and we're going to actually remove Daniel Afri from the list. He hasn't been selected since the World Cup, except for playing some African Nations Champions games, which is not the senior team. So basically off the team, a small chance of coming back into the fray, but not much. Also, Yoya Boa was not selected for the squad and has not come into the picture since. So going back to the history, it was mostly Sulemana in the African Cup. I say mostly, he did start all 3 games there, but one time he switched ranks, or he switched flanks, I should say. So instead of playing on the left, he played on the right, and the right midfielder, or the right attacking midfielder, who we'll meet soon, came over to the left side. Following that, basically it's been Sulemana and Jordan Ayew sharing the position there, and it was Jordan Ayew who played the position in the World Cup. So that is what's happened there. We're going to erase the highlights here then, and focus our attention on 2023. So we have now Jordan Ayew moving up to, we're going to say a definite in this position, but really what it means is that he's a definite somewhere on the field. We actually do think he will play on the left. He has increasingly been doing so. Sulemana still gets some starts over the last year, but Jordan Ayew is getting more. And then in the last game, it was the forward Semenyo playing in this position. We'll meet him when we get to forwards. So Jordan Ayew then a definite candidate. And we have Kamaldeen Suleiman moving down from likely to a possible candidate. And there he joins Joseph Paintsil, who remains a possible candidate. And those are the candidates that we have here. So let's predict the starters for the upcoming Cup. And I'm going to say about 67% sure or 2/3 sure on Jordan Ayew as the starter on the left side. But I wouldn't be surprised if he, say, switches to the right side and Kamaldeen gets a start. But I don't think Kamaldeen Suleiman, I should say, will be a starter as he was in the 2021 African Cup. Okay, moving over to the right wing. We look at the candidates from 2022. We only had one at the possible level here, and that was Osman Bukhari. Osman Bukhari was selected for the 2022 World Cup, but only as a substitute. And so you may be wondering who is playing in this position. And really, it's been kind of chaotic, even going back to the African Cup in the beginning of 2022. In that cup, it was left winger Jonathan Paintsil, Jordan Ayew, and then effectively it was Isahaku Abdul Fatawu. Although he did switch flanks, but we'll call him the right winger there. In the two World Cup qualifying games in March of 2022, it was Fatawu again. And by the time we get to the World Cup, it was Mohamed Kudus, who we have met as a central midfielder, and forward Inaki Williams, who we will meet shortly when we get to forward. So you can see it's been different players throughout here. So recently, it's continued to be very unsettled with everyone except those players I mentioned, Kudus, Williams, and Fatawu, the ones who played in the World Cup, getting a turn. So they didn't play, but Ernest Nuama, who we'll add to the list here, left winger Paintsil has played it, Bukhari, who we have on the list here, and forward Semenyo. But it was actually Jordan Ayew getting the most starts in this position as well. So we'll see when we add names to the list that they're clearly scrambling to fill the position with a player coded as a right winger or a right attacking midfielder. And we even have a couple of players on the list who were brought in but not started in the position. So let's repopulate the list here with the candidates that we have. Osman Bukhari, because he was selected, his name is now in black text, and he remains at the possible level. We have at a likely level Ernest Nuama. Ernest Nuama started only one of the 7 games since his first start in June of 2023, but he was subbed in for 6 others. So we have him as a likely candidate, but not as a likely starter. We also have the player that we mentioned, Isahaku Abdul Fatawu. We had him listed as an attacking midfielder actually for the 2022 World Cup, but we're going to move him over here now as a possible candidate, and he did make the squad. And then we have a couple of candidates who have come in, both German-born players, Ransford Yeboah Königsdorfer and Kingsley Schindler. Both of those players at the possible level. So what we're left with here is one candidate at the likely level, Ernest Nuama, although he would be a substitute, and then Osman Bukhari, Fatawu, Königsdorfer, and Schindler as all as possible candidates. So it's been such a mix and match since the World Cup that we don't dare predict who the starters are going to be on this side. Personally, I think maybe Kudus and Jordan Ayew coming over to this side seem the most likely, but that is, not a confident prediction. Okay, so a bit of chaos on the right wing there, but we move on to the forward line. We start with attacking midfielders there, and you're going to see we've moved a few of these players around, but let's take a look at the list we had back in 2022. We had a definite candidate in Andre Ayew, and also here we had Jordan Ayew. We've since moved him to left wing, and we have Isahaku Abdul Fatawu, all three as definite candidates. We thought all three were going to be starters. As it turned out, Fatawu didn't start. He appeared only briefly in game 3 there. Jordan Ayew, though, did start, was a starter, and Andre Ayew also selected, of course, but and also starting each of the 3 games there in the World Cup. He was, in fact, the captain, Andre Ayew. So let's look at the position. We're going to actually add Kudus to the discussion here. We'll put him in as if he was a new candidate. Here, he was on our list as a definite central midfielder, but sometimes we're going to see plays as a central attacking midfielder as well. So in the African Cup back at the beginning of 2022, the position was only used in the first game. I think that was a 4-2-1-3 there. 4-2-3-1, I should say. And it was Andre Ayew playing in that position. However, they didn't use it in the following 2 games. They also used it in one of the 2 World Cup qualifying games in March of 2022, and there it was played by Mohamed Kudus. And then in the World Cup, they used the position twice, and both times it was played by Andre Ayew. Okay, and then let's get rid of the highlights here, and we're actually going to clean things up because we moved Jordan Ayew to the left wing, so we'll remove him from the list, as well as Fatawu, who we moved to the right midfield there as a possible candidate. And we're left with Andre Ayew, and we're going to move him down to a likely candidate here. Over the past year, let me see, he has started only 5 of their 12 games there, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2, but not selected for 4 matches. So likely seems the best position for him. We're also putting Mohamed Kudus here as a likely candidate here, and what we mean by that is likely in terms of being a central attacking midfielder. In terms of making the squad and being a starter, we think he's a definite, but he won't necessarily start as the central attacking midfielder. As mentioned, Fatawu has been moved to the right as a possible candidate, and so that's all we have. That's all we have here. So actually, yes, I'll remove Kudus from the new category. So we're left with 2 likely candidates, and the position actually has been used a bit more regularly since the World Cup in 2022, especially in the qualifying games for the African Cup 2023. And again, it was Ayew and Andre Ayew and Kudus sharing the position. So in terms of predicting starters for the Cup upcoming here, we're not sure actually if the position will be used, but if it is used, we would say it's to be shared between Andre Ayew and Kudus. So in terms of central attacking midfielder, we're going to kind of put them both at the possible level or highlight them in light blue, but we don't feel confident enough to nominate one of them as a starter. All right. We go to secondary strikers. We don't have any nominated, and I don't think we did in the World Cup either. So we go straight to the forward line here. And back in 2022, we had, oh, this is a grave error, Felix Afena-Gyan as a definite candidate. And we had a couple of possible candidates, three actually, in Kwasi Okier-Reed, Benjamin Tete, and Antoine Semenyo, whose name we've kind of seen a couple of times already, starting as a winger. And we actually had five candidates who seemed to be off the squad and who had an outside chance of maybe making it to the World Cup, but none of them did, and they haven't been brought in since, so we won't add them to the list. We will add Inaki William as a new candidate to the list, Inaki Williams. He got his first start in 2022, shortly before the Cup. But unlike the two players we saw, Tariq Lamptey and Mohamed Salisu, he has stayed on with the squad. So Inaki Williams will consider a new candidate for 2022. Okay, let's look at the selections then. Inaki Williams was selected, of course, and our big mistake there was in nominating Felix Afena-Gyan. And so I'll just actually deal with him quickly because it's an interesting story. He actually first appeared by being named to the preliminary squad for the 2021 African Cup, even though he had never appeared for the national team, but he didn't make the final cut for that squad. Even now, Afena-Gyan is 20 years old, so still very young, and even younger. We're talking about a year ago, and he was playing for Roma and was very popular. Apparently, he played very well in the World Cup qualifying games and was considered by the fans to be a good candidate for the Cup, and that's why we had him at the definite level. However, even by his own admission, he felt he was called up too early to the squad, and he wanted to kind of learn more on the Jose Mourinho at Roma in Italy. In 2022, though, he took a fairly big step down, moving from Roma to Cremonese in Italy, a much smaller team. And I'm not sure when in 2022 that happened, but he was named to the preliminary squad for the 2022 World Cup and didn't make the final cut, which was a bit shocking. And people were upset because, again, he had been considered one of their best players. So we'll have to see if he makes it back to the squad. But his club affiliation now, Cremonese in Italy, and we know club affiliations are important among the most of the African teams there. So anyway, the long and short of it is that our definite candidate, Felix Afena-Gyan, was neither selected nor has he been called up since November of 2022. Also, we'll clear out the list a little bit. Kwasi Okier-Reed is now off the squad, and so is Benjamin Tete, last appearing in June of 2022. So let's see what happened with the forwards in the 2022 World Cup. It was Jordan, actually, with the 2022 African Cup in January. It was Jordan Ayew in the first game, Andre Ayew in the second, and then both Ayew brothers in the African Cup playing as centre forward. We mentioned Afena-Gyan performing well in the two World Cup qualifiers. He was the starter in both of those March 2022 games. In game one of the World Cup, it was Jordan Ayew plus Williams, Inaki Williams, brought in, and then Williams for game 2 and Mohamed Kudus for game 3. So you can see why we consider Kudus more of an attacking player than a central midfielder. Since then, Williams has predominated, but Jordan and Andre Ayew sometimes appear as a centre forward, as well as Semenyo once, but Semenyo has been used more as a winger. So let's repopulate the list here. We now have Inaki Williams as a definite candidate, and well, Jordan Ayew might appear here too, but we have him as a definite candidate for left winger, so we won't put him on the list here. We have Antoine Semenyo as a likely candidate, so he moves up from possible to likely. Also, his name changes to black because he's been through a tournament. And we have a possible candidate in Jonathan Sowa. So quite a few changes here, especially since the African Cup at the beginning of 2022. And we think that Inaki Williams will be the starter here. And we're actually going to put him in the spotlight because he came late to the World Cup. So we didn't cover him in the actual media cast there. And so it's as if he's being introduced here, although he has been in the tournament in the World Cup. So Inaki Williams with the team since shortly before the World Cup in 2022. And he has 8 caps and no goals, surprisingly, for a forward. He was actually with the Spanish national team in 2016. He played 1 game for Spain, and then has recently shifted his allegiance over to Ghana. He plays for Athletic Bilbao in Spain since 2014. And was with Athletic Bilbao's youth club as well. And Inaki Williams was actually born in Spain, which is why he could play for their team. So a starter in the World Cup. He must have started out of position in game 1 because I have him starting all 3 games in the World Cup here, but he didn't score any goals and has yet to do that for the national team. Over the past 2 years, he then has started 8 of their 12 games, and he has subbed in for 2 and been on the bench for 1. And the only game that Inaki Williams missed was due to an injury. So always called up and a definite candidate here too. We think he will be the starter. All right, that brings us to the end of our look at the candidates. And so we are going to do our spotlight review. That's for a bit of fun. We're going to predict who we think the starters are going to be. So I'm actually going to start with the manager. And over the course of doing this media cast here, I've kind of become a bit doubtful. Ghana and other African teams sometimes do change their manager shortly before the cup, and there are so many positions kind of in doubt here. It was a bit chaotic before the 2022 World Cup, and I'm sure they wanted to see a bit more stability under Chris Hughton. And I'm not seeing that stability. There's only a few positions that seem to be nailed down. Some of them are not his fault because of injury and stuff like that. But I would not be shocked to see them replace the manager even at this late stage. Just a slight chance of that, but I'm not confident enough to put Chris Hughton in green there. And you'll see a bit more what we mean as we go through this spotlight review. So in the goalkeeper position, we have 3 candidates actually with pretty good claims on the goal: Ati Ziggy and Wallacott and Richard Ofori, who came in for the last 2 games there. And given what we said about them here, I'm not willing to kind of predict which of the 3 are going to start. So nothing there for goalkeepers. For central defense, it's kind of the same, but in this case, it's largely due to injuries. So if they were fit, we would probably put Daniel Amarte there at least. And but again, we have 3 candidates with fitness issues, and then 2 who were brought in at the end probably because of the fitness issues. So we're not willing to really predict a starter for that one too. Okay, so we'll have to see when we get closer to the cup here. At left back, though, we do have a pretty definite candidate in Gideon Mensah. Baba Ramyan was what we thought for 2022. Gideon Mensah, we think, has taken over the spot and will be the starter. On the right, we think it is going to be a rotation between central defender, or the player coded as central defender, Aladou Seydou, and Dennis Odoi. And so really, that's not kind of hesitating in our guesses. We really do think it will be a rotation between the two of them. The blue, what we have for central midfielders, is a bit of hesitancy. We think Thomas Partey would be a definite, but there's a bit of an injury doubt hanging over him. And as far as Mohamed Kudus goes, we think he's going to definitely be a starter. We just don't know what position it's going to be. So he has played as a central midfielder, and we kept him coded as that here. But really, we think he's more of an attacking midfielder, and equally may start in an attacking midfield or more attacking role than as a central midfielder here. So we leave Thomas Partey and Mohamed Kudus as a blue highlight, but not confident enough to put any of them as a definite or a green highlight. We are confident enough to put Jordan Ayew as a left winger, and we're kind of fudging a little bit there because we don't think he'll necessarily start on the left wing. It's quite possible he will play right wing or even centre forward, but we are confident that he will be a starting player in the cup, and quite possibly on the left wing. We saw the right wing position is a bit chaotic with all sorts of players coming in and out. We can't even nominate really a character or a candidate there. In fact, Jordan Ayew has been the player who's played there the most amongst many others, but we already have him as our left winger, so we can't have him as both. Again, not confident enough to nominate a starter there, and so we're going to leave it blank. Central attacking midfielder, we think that is going to be a shared position if they use it. The question there is whether they will have the formation that uses a central attacking midfielder. If they do, we think the position will be shared between Andre Ayew and Mohamed Kudus. So we have Mohamed Kudus in blue as a central midfielder and as a central attacking midfielder. So both of those things add up to a definite. We do think Mohamed Kudus will be a starter. And the forward position is quite firm. Inaki Williams, we think he will be the starter there and are quite confident in that. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the mediacast, or at least a part one of our mediacast for Ghana for the 2023 African Cup. And we will be coming back at you with part two when the squad lists are selected. And so I will just say what we're going to do in part two. We'll kind of go over the list that we've been left with here and look at who made it and who didn't. And we'll also give an update on injuries, which will be very important for Ghana since we have a lot of players under a cloud of injury at this point, which, by the way, is in early December. So there is more than a month for those players to recover, and we'll see how they are when we come back in part two. We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We would like to thank Pixabay and Alexei Ivanov of Mappa Music for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast.